the capacity of men to make any positive contribution or interjection on this issue. So we have an all-women's panel discussing only women's issues. But what we lack in terms of a male perspective here, we'll more than make up for it because of the experiences and the observations of these accomplished individuals we have on the stage with us. I'd like to begin by saying that women of my generation, we find it very conflicting, very disturbing even that this is 2017 and we are still talking about where are the women? Where are the women in leadership positions? Where are the women in positions of power? Because our mothers before us and our grandmothers before them have fought the fight for us. And we've had it much simpler, much easier. But when we look at the larger picture, we realize that women are there. But when it comes to the brass tacks, when we talk of leadership, when we talk of positions of power, where do the women vanish? Where do they disappear? For every Chanda Kochar or a Indira Nui, you have hundreds and thousands of women who simply dissipate. You don't know where they go. I come from mine is the biggest newspaper. We have a newsroom teeming with women. But how many women are in a position to control that newsroom? So that's what we'll be talking about here. And the Americans have recently declared, they made a confession that they were not ready for a woman president. Closer home, we have this false sense of pride that, oh, we trumped you. I mean, no pun intended, but we've had Indira Gandhi, and we've had Benazir Bhutto, and we've had a Sheikh Hasina in the subcontinent. But the fact is that had these women not been born into the families that they were born in, had they not come from the legacy that they came from, would they have been where they were? I'd like to begin with Dr. Kumaramangalam. I mean, you've been a politician. You have a holistic 360-degree view of women, women's issues. So where are the women in position of power in politics?
Namaskar, everybody. She's asked a very relevant question. Now, this question is asked too often, perhaps, in India. The fact is that there are a lot of women who can fill leadership roles. However, we don't really look out for them, we don't really search for them, and more often than not, they don't have either the confidence or the opportunity to come into what we call public life, regardless of whether it's politics or any other sphere. In politics, of course, we say that it's time that women are given reservations so that we actually are allowed, and this is a word that I use very consciously, so that we're actually allowed to enter assembly and parliament and will be able to present a perspective which is different, not necessarily always women-centric, but perspectives that perhaps reflect more of what Veena Sikri was talking about in the last discussion about soft power. Women are known for soft power, but we're very rarely recognized for it. And in a way, she's also right, because women have not been given the opportunity or the training, or perhaps the word of today, skilling, to actually take center stage and have both the confidence and the access to knowledge that you need to be able to become contributing decision makers. There is a fallacy in today that, this whole thing about women's empowerment is women versus men. It isn't. And again, I agree with her for the third time, I think within the first 2 minutes of the discussion, that we really should have had a couple of men on this panel. We need to hear the voices of men when it comes to what you're talking about. Empowerment, according to me, today has become a very, what we call ghisapita word. What do we mean by empowerment? We need to have women in decision-making positions. Everybody accepts that. But how do we get the women there? How do we identify them? Who are the ones? Are we really ready to give them the opportunity to make decisions? Or is it just going to be cosmetic? My term as the chairperson of the National Commission for Women just got over a few months ago. And I'm probably going to be lampooned for saying this. I don't know how many press people are here. Please don't misquote me. But quite frankly, the National Commission of Women's Powers are relatively much less than that of any other commission that is there in the government of India. Now, whose fault is this? Both the women and the men, both the bureaucracy and the politicians. The fact is that even now, that, the women's session is the last session of this entire conclave, and there are only 4 or 5 of us sitting here talking about other women. It shouldn't be that way. It should be both men and women sitting on the same stage and willing to share the same space. It's not just about power. it's also about opportunity. In fact, it's more about opportunity than about power. No two human beings are equal. Some women will come up, some won't. Similarly, that for men. And this is a truism that we forget. Sometimes I feel that we have adapted too much or adopted too much of what is called the Western activism around women. Indian culture and Indian Sanskriti, for want of a better word, and historically in India, you've had an enormous number of women, beginning from Kalki herself, whether it's south, north, east, west, you will have different stories. This is not just about Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga and Kali. This is about the way women were viewed. In the past, women have had the confidence to argue, to put their point forth. You have Lakshmi Bai who strapped her child on her back and went to war. Today I'm constantly being told, and this I think is, was shoved down our throat by the imperialists, regardless of where they came from other parts of the world, that if a woman sets foot outside of the house, the family breaks. It doesn't. All of us here have our families, and to all of us, our families are still the most important thing. And this is what our country has been about. It has been about not really a sense of equality, but a sense of giving respect to those who deserve it, regardless, whether it's caste, whether it's creed, whether it's gender. And I was extremely happy to see Lakshmi here yesterday. I started work in the social sector in 1991, and I started work in HIV/AIDS prevention. So the first people I met were truck drivers, sex workers, the LGBT community. They weren't called LGBT then. That came later after around the end of the 20th century, when it became fashionable to talk about sexual health, etc. In 91, nobody wanted to work with these communities. When I started work, everybody asked me, you, from your family, your background, your education, you're working with these people? As if they weren't human beings. The first thing that we have to understand about women is that we're women after being human beings. We're women after being individuals. We're all part of the same country. Man, woman shouldn't make a difference, and we shouldn't be still talking about women's development. We're already in many ways developed. It's just that we are not given the chance, the opportunity to show our skills.
Thank you. That's a very important point you made, because it's very conflicting that every time, if you're talking of a woman who's a doctor, it's always lady doctor, it's always a woman reporter. So, when you talk of Sachin Tendulkar, there is no prefix that says he's a male cricketer. But when you're talking of a Julan Goswami, there'll be, woman cricketer. Sandhya ji, you've been in the profession for a very long time, and you started at a time when women weren't in the numbers that they are now in newsrooms. So how has the journey been for you?
Thank you, India Foundation, for the opportunity. Actually, when I was asked to speak on this topic, I had prepared a little backgrounder. I think my approach was a little less negative than on the dais so far. I want to say that, beginning with Smriti's question, when I came into the profession, there was already one generation of women, people like Usha Rai and all. What's her name? Barkhadat's mother? Prabha ji she was actually still there in the Hindustan Times where I joined. And it was not regarded as, it was being accepted that women are coming in. We did have misogyny. We used to get some barbed remarks here and there, and every woman still gets them. But I don't think at the time when I was growing up as a child that there was an atmosphere of negativity about women coming forward. When my father went to Hindu college, his fellow students included people, the great academic, you will know, Kapila Vatsyayan and people like that. So these were women who had already had family backgrounds where they were sent to school, which is how they reached in college. And then they went forward and they became great people in their own right. Women were moving forward. The question here is the momentum and the sheer numbers. According to me, in the 21st century, when we were moving into it, I was already 40 when the 21st century began. It did look like this was going to be the century where the numbers would show. They are showing in some places and they're not showing in others. But sitting here in South Asia, Smriti has rightly said, women have come from political backgrounds, but the first woman elected Prime Minister in the whole modern world, post-Second World War, was Sri Lanka's Sirimavo Bandaranaike. She was a widow, but she was the woman, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi came after that. So South Asia has had, because of the culture that we're talking about today, a different dynamics. Let's compare it with America. There is Mrs. Hillary Clinton. She stepped forward for the role she wanted only out of a sense of entitlement, which didn't work in her country. In our country, that sense of continuity, culture, whatever you call it, women have got their chances very often. And now we are seeing them in many places, especially in the corporate world, in entrepreneurial world, in sports. The explosion of Indian women in sports, and especially the younger generation, it's totally remarkable. One of the points I do want to make in the context of India, and this is, I had said it earlier, I'd like to emphasize, unlike Western feminists, people like Germaine Greer and all those, they were people who had to fight their misogyny within their own families and break out and fight their way through. Gloria Steinem and people like that. Even education they had to struggle for. Rich families didn't support girls who were smarter than brothers and get their education. In India, the experience of every woman almost is different. We are sent by families to school, to college. Recently, a woman who does menial labor in Rajasthan, she supported 3 children to be educated. All the 3 girl children were recently selected through a competitive examination in the Rajasthan State Civil Service. It has been flashed all over the world. I'm sure everyone knows this. This is an aspect of our empowerment which is coming from within our society, which should make us doubly proud that we are the culture that is supporting our Durga, Kali, everything. Another thing, rather than beginning from an elite note, I want to make one point. When the 21st century began, this is a real story of women leadership and empowerment. There was a child bride who ran away from home, and somehow she landed in a shelter in Mysore. She was only 15. The shelter owner said that why don't you and 2 other girls, I have encouraged them, learn driving and become taxi drivers. Now that person must also be very, very advanced thinking. They learned driving. The 2 senior members of the women driving little clique dropped out, though they had been empowered with a joint taxi. And they said, we can't cope with the male customers and this public reaction. This girl continued. Her name is Selvi Gowda. She is today the owner of a women taxi service in Mysore. She found another man, she got married, and she had been trafficked as, she was abused as a little child bride. She was trafficked by her husband, and today she has another man in her life. She's married, she has 2 children, and the first taxi driver service in Mysore. It's a huge city, it's a very cultured city, and this is leadership, because here is a woman who landed in a real cesspool. She pulled herself out of it, and she's a beacon of inspiration to women all over the world, because this is what you can do with a little support, and our society has been giving this support. In politics, we know it has been mostly a story of family connection. I'm actually not a very avid supporter of reservations, because I see them differently, but I want to say that when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, he tried to increase the grassroots empowerment of women by giving 30% reservations at panchayat level. Now, unfortunately for us, that immediately meant that women from the seats where men are losing to women were put up as proxies for the same men. These women were illiterates from the same family, and you had the phenomenon, which is a source of ridicule all over the world, which is called the Panchpati, the husband of the Sarpanch. He would exercise the powers, and he would misuse or use whatever. But over the years, what we have had is that some of the women sarpanches, and this has been reported also, which is how I know, have come forward and said, now we will not observe parda anymore. The removal of parda, because they said we are now in public life, we have the right to deal with people. People have the right to see the face of the representative they expect to represent. There needs to be a human interaction. And this parda has started going even in orthodox societies like Rajasthan. This is a positive development that has happened on its own. The flip side of this is that today we do have 13.45 lakh women at this level, and they are ready, I think, for the next level. We do not have a system of society to take these elected women, and now educated young women are coming up and being elected as sarpanches so that they can read the documents, understand the finances, and take the society forward. These women are now ready to come to assembly. I met some of them myself. They're very dynamic. They're ready even to come to parliament. We have not created the pipeline. No political party has taken the initiative to take up a dynamic woman and take her forward. Now this current government should be doing this thing, because government level programs like Swachh Bharat, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, all the empowerment at the grassroots level is going to need dynamic women. And this is something that really the country needs to look at. Internationally, when we look at women leaders, we find them having a bad time. Hillary, we've already seen, she never became the president. Dilma Rousseff was overthrown in an internal coup in Brazil. Theresa May is having a tough time in London. We don't know how much she'll survive. Aung San Suu Kyi is having very bad press, but she will survive physically. And Angela Merkel, I don't know what kind of coalition she's going to succeed, if at all, in fashioning. So she's getting weaker. In India, we have Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, who's no longer the president of the Congress party, but we have Mayawati trying to make her come back. So it's very mixed at this moment. We do have good members in parliament. We do have some good members in our cabinet. And there's a general feeling that women's representation could be much more than it is. The debate in India has been whether the reservation should be given at party ticket level or in the house. I personally don't favor the house route, because you get more and more of the family-based women, and the entitlement process takes over completely. I would just leave it for a while. I would like to say that the rise of women in India has been one of India's million mutinies, quiet and steady, and there's not going to be much of a reversal on that. In the corporate sector, we are finding the phenomenon of women not making it adequately to the boards of the companies. There's a legal requirement, and that just again gets filled in by a family member, which doesn't really help because it doesn't contribute to anything. Here, India is in fact lagging behind the world. There was a 2015 study by Deloitte, and they said only 7.7% women are on the boards in India. The figure is 12% globally, which is also inadequate. If women are 50% of the population world over, this is very inadequate. But we do have women. One example, we have the Chanda Kochar, Naina Lal, Kidwai and all that. I would like to mention Arundhati Bhattacharya, who was the managing director of the chairman of the State Bank of India, because she joined as a probationary officer right at the bottom, worked her way up to the top, and that is the way women expect to rise. They don't expect to encounter a glass ceiling right at the top. She never got that. And when she got her post, one of the things she did for women was to give a 2-year sabbatical policy for employees who need to take care of elders in the family or need to bring up children in the family. This is something that has not been adequately noticed. We have lots of corporate women. Kiran Sharma Azumda started in a garage in her own house, and she's now leading the huge biopharmacare society, corporation. all these huge American MNC companies in India. Of course, Indra Nooyi has been mentioned, but there's Microsoft, there's IBM. All these companies, their India heads are Indian women, and that again is a very positive thing. We do have women from corporate families like Priya Paul and Simon Tata, but the contribution they're making to the sector is their own, and this needs to be recognized. Godrej family also has some ladies coming forward. Before I conclude, I'd like to mention one picture you may all recall. When our Mars mission launch took place and was very successful, everyone knows the Prime Minister was there, but the picture which caught everyone's attention was of these top-level scientists in the mission room, all women, so many of them, wearing saris, jewelry, flowers in their hair, and celebrating. That is women's empowerment at its best. Nobody knew until then that we have such highly intellectually qualified women at the top, at the cutting edge of science, and there they were. And this is our way of mutinizing even education. I should mention here Tessie Thomas. She is the Agni Missile Woman of India. She's in charge of Agni 4 at DRDO. We all recognize our favored, most people's president, Abdul Kalam, as Missile Man. We also have a missile woman. We need to recognize her. Sports, we are everywhere. Women's cricket, I'll mention only that because when the women's cricket won the Asia Cup, the Captain Mithali Raj was asked, who's your favorite male cricketer? And she said that if it was a man winning, would you ask him who's your favorite female cricketer? That's the spunk we need to go forward. We are, women, we have the women who have made the name for themselves in wrestling and those kind of male sports. They have been trained by male coaches. They have been supported by their families, even against their wishes. But everywhere you find, women are there. I think 35 years ago, Bachendri Pal became the first woman to scale the Everest. After that, she's my personal friend, Santosh Yadav. She has scaled it twice. There's nowhere that we are lacking, and now we are having women in combat services also. So I really don't think there's a time for despondency, but there is a need to increase women, allow them to come forward in places where they feel that they are getting an invisible glass ceiling. That should end. Having said so much of positivity, I feel we have to note the fact that all over the world, there are only 19 female elected presidents and prime ministers, which is very, very underrepresentative. In the corporate sector, women are 4.6% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. When we go to Fortune 1000, it should increase, but it doesn't. It remains the same 4.6%. So I think worldwide, much has to be done. One thing where we cannot tolerate any complacency is the absolute rise in numbers and incidents of sexual harassment, sexual molestation, sexual abuse, women, children, old women, infants. It has become a social malaise in itself, especially in India. I won't talk about other countries. And this is something where we have to think on the religious, cultural front, why it is happening in our own homes, why it is happening in the society at large, and what we can do about it. Even elite institutions have been charged with sexual harassment suits and things. That is something that we have to, I think, give real thought to. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya ji. Before we move to the next speakers, I hope some of the men present here have some questions for us, which will be after the speakers finish talking. Nistula, before I come to you, I thought Alison Pearson, a journalist, had settled it for us when she said trying to be a man is a waste of a woman. But in newsrooms, which you and I have been part of, women are present in greater numbers. We are doing the jobs. We are covering the beats, the so-called men-only, men-dominated beats. But there are instances. For instance, Nistula covers politics. And you know, you have to admit at the end of the day, it's a little boys' club. So how do you break into it, and how do you see things transforming? Where do you see women managing and taking control of a newsroom?
Well, I'd like to make a couple of short points on taking off from what you just said. Taking a cue from my own work experience. I've been a journalist now for 17 years and fairly covering areas which were considered male preserves, although as Sandhya ji mentioned earlier, we had predecessors who had blazed a trail for us to follow. But in terms
of... there were no separate toilets for women in newsrooms, so...
Yeah, there are several women in newsrooms, but what happens is that the entry point, you have a lot of people. But the pyramid narrows very sharply as you move to the top. So therefore, you could be 5 women in a bureau, but you will be reporting to a male boss. Okay, and sometimes the male boss would actually cry out saying that he was feeling a little overwhelmed by having to handle women in the workspace. So it's not like there are a lot of women who are in leadership positions. That is something that needs to be excuse me, looked at. But I would like to be a little provocative, going beyond the positives or negatives of women's leadership. I want to go beyond this entire idea that if there is a woman leader in a particular workspace, that she would be thinking in a different way, or a more warm and fuzzy, sort of compassionate kind of way. I have not seen much of evidence of that empirically. I have seen that women employ power much in the same way as men do. So power has its own logic, and it's gender neutral as far as I can see it. There's nothing wrong with that. My basic point is that when you there should be no virtue signaling as far as women's leadership is concerned. We are half the population. We deserve to inhabit spaces and parts of the establishment and the anti-establishment, intellectual spaces, armed forces, all sectors of society. We deserve it, and we deserve it because we are half the population. So we deserve it for that reason alone, not because we'll be better or worse, or we are becharas or not so becharas.
Also deserve it on the basis of merit.
And it is this flooding, it is this increase in the number of people who are there, which will, I feel, make a very strong change. It will mark a change in the behavior in the workplace. A few years ago, you could get away with a sexist remark. I mean, I don't know, Smriti, if you were there at one of the briefings that we were attending, and somebody from the political side whose briefing we were attending was asked a question by a male journalist that, you know, are you acting out like this because, you know, you have a feeling of vengeance inside you. You want to take vengeance against your political rival, and therefore you are going after that person. And this person reacted, possibly expecting that, you know, lots of men in the room, that मेरी ये औरतों वाली बुद्धि नहीं है कि मैं बदले की भावना से कोई भी काम करूं. Immediately I stood up, I said, no, you have to take your words back. I mean, this has nothing, badle ki bhavna has nothing to do with man or woman. You know, I could be as forgiving as the next person, and you could be as full of vengeance, you know, as the person sitting next to you. And there were 5 ladies in that room, thankfully, who also kind of supported me in that. And immediately the words were taken back because there were 5 women glaring the man down. And a powerful politician had to take his words back, saying, I'm so sorry, I really didn't mean it. These unseemly things, this kind of behavior, this boys' club as you're talking about, this is something, and I firmly believe it is only going to go away if you have more and more women. There could be good women, bad women, any kind of women. Women who will sell your cause down the river, that also happens, who want to be with the boys' club and want approbation from the male section of the population. That's fine. But if you have many people there are your concerns take the form of a class action suit, which is what is required, which is what gives force to whatever it is that you want to have. And I used to be of the opinion in the past that, you know, merit should have its way, and women and men should compete and get by, and whatever. But now I do feel that there are certain very targeted interventions that are required to increase the number of women in several sectors of the workplace. Companies could be incentivized to provide a women-friendly sort of employment policy, because the reason for this great dropout in middle management that we see in our profession and in several others, including the corporate sector, is because of childcare issues related to increasing families. You've had a baby, you don't want to go back to work, all of those things, because there's no creche, there is no childcare support at your workspace, and men don't have those issues. So they, in that particular point of time, they can best you and they can get ahead, and therefore you find more of them in the leadership spot. So those are things that those targeted interventions are required, I feel. So this is basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you. You talk of targeted interventions, and which is what our next speaker here does. For the benefit of those who don't know, Setara is from a TV channel which is owned by a man, but is an entirely all-women operation. It is run by women, and it has programs targeted specifically for women. My question to you is that women in Afghanistan, as is the case with any other conflict zone, they suffer the most. I mean, violence against them, targeted violence against them is definitely much more compared to men. So, one, in a volatile situation, how is it for women to come out and work on issues which, again, can make them targets? Two, is it not sort of limiting? I mean, would you not want to yank that microphone and have your voice heard in a mixed newsroom, in a male-dominated newsroom? So just my concern there, is it limiting or is it empowering?
I would start with extending my sincere appreciation for the opportunity to come here as an Afghan woman and talk not only about the issues we face as women in Afghanistan, but also representing Afghan women in India, I think, is such an accomplishment. So thank you for honoring us. I would also like to briefly speak about Zan TV, which is a women's TV channel. Founded only to have the vision to bring one day equal rights, equal participation, and equal opportunities of men and women in Afghanistan to be able to accelerate the economic growth, sustainable development, peace and security, and together that would only enable Afghanistan to accomplish those goals. And I would also like to say that Zan TV is a platform that gives the women a center stage in the digital media, consulting her political, social, cultural, psychological, and even religious empowerment. We have, in this channel, as you might imagine, this is not an easy task in such a conservative society as Afghanistan, because our challenges are not only one thing, but quite a various forms of challenges. One is the conservative society, religious barriers of women's movement, and also lack of competencies due to decades of war in Afghanistan, finding competent employees among women in digital media, media production is a challenge, and that's something that we have to deal with every day. So the TV is not only empowering women, focusing on agendas, on topics that would empower women, but also give the opportunity to women to foster skills and competencies that would lead, help other women stand on their feet. And I have, and one of my focus as being the leader of this TV is that Zan TV should go beyond mere presentation of factual information about women. Oh, this woman in Helmand got her nose cut off. Oh, that woman had burned herself due to domestic violence. But also see how we can be more significant in playing a role in making people understand how important it is to include women in all provision of society, whether it's education, whether it's politics, whether it's peace and security. And peace and security have a vital role in women's lives, and nobody really realizes it because historically women have been left out of the peace and security processes, and Afghanistan is not an exception. While people, the Afghan government and the international community for years now have been talking about bringing Taliban on the table of talks. Now we are going to reconcile, but Taliban have been cruel to women. How are we going to ensure that women, that Taliban coming back are not going to bring back those values, those cruelty towards women, and not seeing them as human beings, but a thing that they could honor or dishonor as they see fit. So these are the challenges that we are, as a TV station, trying to fight against. And that's not should happen while we reconcile with the Taliban or not. Women should be included. Women should have a say. And how are they going to deal with it? So how are we going to, and women have a voice in saying their opinions about how a country is going to ensure that women are not going to have to deal with a backward, conservative ideology that Afghanistan has suffered from for decades now. If I have a time, I've always been bothered as a child of the underrepresentation of women in managerial or top positions. I can remember a decade ago, there was something in the Parliament of Europe, and I saw only men in suit. And there were rarely any women, and that's not, so this is not a case only in the Eastern world, but this is also in Western world. Although the opportunity is equal for education, for capacity building for men and women, yet there, for some reason, women have a hard time getting to the top positions. And there are different various reasons, and I see one of the reasons women being in terms with the status that they are given. And that's a huge challenge. How are we going to train girls and women to understand that they are more important than that? That they have a better position, they can have a better status than that. And the other thing that I usually also observe is women, because we have been persuaded to think that we are not good enough, that our decisions are not comprehensive enough, and that we have begun to believe that. Now it's taking those disbeliefs away from women and encouraging them that they are, or some people even believe that women should groom masculine characteristics to be able to be good leaders. So you have to wear suit and have, I don't know, short hair and talk aggressively to be seen as someone who's capable. So we have to work harder. So we have to prove our capabilities. While a man, it's easier because we are seen being them in leadership positions for centuries, and it's seen as something which is much more normal. And a woman, even if she is assertive, we look at her as aggressive. If she is loud, we see her as someone we do not like to be around because we have not seen them in those positions. And we have to question ourselves. Why is it that I am nicer to a man leader, but I'm not as nice to a woman leader? When I see women in a leadership positions, instead of me supporting her, I would challenge her in any way possible. Also being a woman, because it's not the role I have known her for. She is kind, she gives me food, she clothes me, she cleans, but wow, she's gonna guide me, she's gonna be the strategic thinker who's gonna guide me and support me and bring a team together to accomplish something that we as a team or a company have to accomplish. And that's something we rarely have seen a woman in. We have to now, women should change seeing themselves and see themselves in women and leadership positions, and men accepting that women, just because she has been doing these other jobs, does not disqualify her from these other positions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Setara. That's a very interesting point you made there, that not only do we have to get used to the fact that women are going to be present there, they're going to be present in far greater numbers and in far greater leadership positions, we also have to get used to the fact on how to treat them as leaders, because the definitions are not going to work if you're going to treat women, try to fit them in little tiny boxes. Nistula made a very interesting intervention. She said that there has to be targeted intervention to make conditions for women to rise. But of late we've seen even a legislation like allowing 6 months maternity leave to women is actually held against them. Dr. Kumaramangalam, you would see a lot of employers actually, they actually hold it against women when you have legislation that says, oh, you can take 6 months off. So what do you do in situations like that?
Yeah, when that law was first introduced, I have a very good friend who's one of the biggest leaders in healthcare, not a doctor, but runs one of the biggest chain of hospitals. And she told me that, this is a very bad law because I have so many nurses, most of my nurses are women, and I'm going to think twice about it because now I have to pay for 6 months leave. And we had a big argument over it. Eventually she agreed to what I was saying because she herself has 3 children. But it is a fact that merely legislation is not enough to bring about a change in the way of thinking. Implementation is far more important, which is why we need to start teaching children very young. There's something that I always tell my children, the way we potty train our children, right from the age of 6 months or whatever it is, we need to actually change the way we think about each other. It shouldn't be about male versus female, like I say. It's not always the boy who needs to be the bully. Girls can be aggressive. Like she said, this whole thing about male versus female now needs to be stopped when we start talking about empowerment. Basically, I feel that, like I said, it's equal opportunity. Some will come up, some won't. And it will not eventually, not immediately, it will take some time. It will not matter whether you're a woman or a man. In today's present situation, more than the laws, it's the implementation which suffers in India. Some of our laws are some of the toughest laws you can find anywhere in the world. Whether it is the Sexual Harassment in the Workplace Act, whether it is the 496A, which is always being complained against by men. The point is that it's in the implementation that we have problems. The first time you go to a police station, you'll be asked, are you exaggerating? It's even today, even other women question women. If you see what happened with that young actress who was on a plane, I think last week, Twitter was absolutely ablaze with comments about how because she's an actress and because she's young and everybody was trying to defend the man. Now I don't know who's wrong or who's right there, but the point is that she should have been taken, she should have been given the benefit of the doubt. Especially given the sort of background that most women come from across the world. Believe me, it's not as if Delhi is the rape capital of the world. I've actually dealt with statistics. If you look at statistics of rape in the American universities, and they're almost always suppressed, you'd be absolutely astounded. And the fact is that given the background that we come from, very, very few women, and I don't even think even one actually, will come out and tell you that I have been sexually abused or harassed if she actually hasn't. It creates a backlash for her that is very difficult to live through. The questions that are asked of her, anyway, are you dressed well? What were you doing? Why were you sitting with your hand on somebody's shoulder? Is that boy your boyfriend? Who is he to you? You may have grown up with this person, he may be an extremely good friend, but no, it'll always be colored in a sexual way. And this is done by both men and women. Patriarchy is not the domain of men. Equal number of women are patriarchal, and sometimes I feel they're in fact more bitter against women who have managed to break boundaries and the so-called proverbial glass ceiling, as she said very rightly, than perhaps even men are. You will find, but I do find that if you give women decision-making powers, over a period of time, not immediately, just like she said about the Panchayati Raj system. 25 years ago, we had a lot more Sarpanch Patis than we have now. Today, we have women who used to be in Parda who say that, no, but I want to do it. I know. The power does teach you, power does change you, and power does teach you how how advantageous it is to have it. So change is there in the air in India. It's not that it isn't. Yeah, the pace is very slow. But to come back to what you asked me, I think it's more about implementation. So if you're talking about interventions, more than targeted interventions, you need to look at perhaps, things that will make this sort of change sustainable. Okay, more diffused interventions, if that's what you want to say. Yeah, now sexual harassment is something very different. Sexual harassment, according to me, it should be that anything that makes anybody uncomfortable. People like me in my generation, we've got used to having all sorts of innuendos, made, and we accepted it because it was part of the norm, which I think today is very wrong. But your generation does not accept it, which I think is very good. So,
at this point, I think we should get in a male voice. I mean, it's only fair to hear from the men now.
I was wanting to say that perhaps, we need to have male reactions to these.
Can we have the mics, please? Can we?
Hi, Anand Ranganathan here. This is really
I was hoping you would ask a question.
Wonderful discussion. My question is to Ms. Setara. Ms. Setara, it's wonderful what you've done in Afghanistan, but without wishing to be patronizing, please don't take it the wrong way. Can you dress like this in your country when you're broadcasting?
Yes, she's dressed fine.
Well, that's a valid question. I have been asked that a lot. And yes, because, well, I dress like this and I don't wear headscarf when I am in my residence and I am at work. And most of the meetings, I'm not wearing a headscarf. And it's not because I want to, and it's a very sensitive issue to talk about, because when I go like this, people will say, how? So are you trying to westernize the Afghan women? No. What I'm trying to do is let the women know that they can make their own choices. That's a basic human right. If I like to be dressed this way, I should be allowed so. If I want to wear a burqa, I should be allowed so. This is a choice of myself. Nobody else should make that choice for me. Clothing is one thing, but it represents a lot of other deeper issues. It represents that I can have the choice to choose to marry whoever I want, when I want to marry, how many children I'm going to bring to the world, where I'm going to work, which field of work I'm going to choose, whether I want to be a pilot or I want to be a policewoman. That is something that should be given to a woman to choose. So I, by decision, dress like this to make other women feel that they too can do whatever they want to do once they are an adult. Thank you.
One more question. The last question, actually.
Yeah, the gentleman in the middle with his hand up. Oh, there are two gentlemen.
Yeah, my question relates to an observation you made some time back. So why do you object when we give 6 months maternity leave to when? I don't object to how much time you get as maternity leave and all. But the point is, if it is the implicit assumption in this law is that childcare is women's work. And I would have been more appreciative, even if you had given a year's leave, and I say this leave has to be shared by you and your spouse, depending on who decides to do the caregiving. I mean, apart from the 1 month that you need immediately after delivery for a recovery, why should a man not be participant in the same leave so that his paternal role comes in early? I mean, I don't see why it should only be a maternity leave. Simple.
We completely agree with you. In fact, men should take more leave. They have an equal responsibility in bringing up the babies. So we completely agree with you.